The White House press secretary also contended just moments ago that the Iranian regime is looking for an exit ramp. And I wonder if you see Iran right now as properly incentivized to deal with President Trump.
I don't think yet. I think Iran senses that it has quite a lot of leverage with its control over the Strait of Hormuz. And I think Iran is going to look to use that leverage and extract as much as it can, even though it has been subject to these very, very significant bombing campaigns. Nonetheless, I think Iran still believes that it is in a position in which it holds some important cards, and it's going to want to play them.
Karoline Leavitt saying just now that we are very close to meeting the objectives of the Iran operation. Mona, there's been some confusion about what those objectives are. And if it's eliminating Iran's nuclear capacity, wouldn't that have to include the seizing of the highly enriched uranium that is still on the loose?
Absolutely. There are several questions around Iran's nuclear capabilities and, in particular, the disposition of that highly enriched uranium. Now, there's some speculation that the latest deployments, the new deployments coming in, a Marine Expeditionary Unit, as well as the 82nd Air Force Brigade, that they could be involved in some effort to take control of that uranium on the ground. But again, that is a highly risky proposition. Hard to know if that's actually what the administration is thinking.
Well, and so when we consider the deployment of more troops this time around, we keep recalling that several weeks ago, when there were, before these strikes were launched on February 28th, there were talks underway between U.S. and Iranian officials and mediators, even as the U.S. was amassing massive military force in theater. Now we're seeing a buildup of troops again, and I wonder how you believe Iran is interpreting that, if that actually makes them less likely to be negotiating with the president, because there may have been an erosion of trust given how this went the first time around.
Absolutely. It's happened twice, actually. And Iran is very well aware of that.
Hammer too. Yeah.
Exactly. And so from Iran's perspective, like as they say, they've been tricked twice and they will not be tricked again. And they've actually noted this buildup in their statements, saying, we are watching, we are seeing your movements, and we will defend our territory at any price. I don't think you can overestimate just how deep this distrust is between the United States and Iran in particular, for example, reportedly refusing to engage with Steve Witkoff or Jared Kushner, and instead seemingly having a preference for J.D. Vance. Of course, we don't know if these details are correct, but what we do know is that there is deep, deep distrust that Iran has, and that is an obstacle to any sort of successful negotiation.
We know the troops are on the way, Mona. Marines from two separate expeditionary units and members of the 82nd Airborne who will be arriving starting as soon as this Friday and over the next couple of weeks. We talked about what this means with Democratic Congressman Jake Auchincloss, a combat Marine Corps veteran of Massachusetts. He told us this on the late edition of Balance of Power yesterday. Listen.
What the president is doing right now is he's calling 911. He's sending the 82nd Airborne and he's sending two Marine Expeditionary Units to the Strait of Hormuz. And the reason he's dialing 911 so frantically is because thus far this war has been a strategic failure. We have sacrificed a significant strategic card to Iran, which is now they have sea denial. They have demonstrated to the world that they can selectively allow transit through the Strait of Hormuz through missiles and mines and drones.
Not to be confused with a tactical failure. Mona, if the president's calling 911, are these the forces that can reopen the strait?
I'm not sure these are the forces that can reopen the strait. I mean, my understanding is these forces may be used to, again, either attempt to take control of that highly enriched uranium, assuming we know where it is, possibly seize Harg Island, which is, of course, offshore, or undertake some operations along Iran's coastline. But I think the understanding is reopening the strait is a very complex endeavor. And that's why, as we recall, the president, in fact, was calling at one point on NATO allies to assist, precisely because this is not something that the United States could do on its own.
Well, and of course, while he's called on NATO allies, he actually has said that it's Gulf allies that have been more helpful so far. And I wonder, Mona, how you're thinking about the other Gulf states and what they would like to see here in terms of outcomes. Is I'm sure you saw reporting in recent days that the Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman is actually pushing the president to continue these operations to make sure that the Iranian government is fully eradicated, essentially, as it stands now. Can you just walk us through what the other Arab nations are likely to want to see here and push for?
Well, Gulf countries all, because they, of course, they are Iran's direct neighbors. They've borne an enormous cost because of these strikes. They're all looking for an end state that will not allow Iran to again threaten the region. I think the question, though, comes as to how exactly that happens. And while it's maybe correct that they want to ensure that the United States, quote unquote, finishes the job, and they don't want to be left holding the bag, they're also, I think, quite wary of being drawn into, for example, offensive operations against Iran, which has at times been speculated in the press. They're in an extraordinarily difficult position, very delicate. And I think at this point they're quite wary of how this could go down. And in particular, as I said, most focused on how does this conflict end and what does Iran look like at the end of this conflict?
Mm-hmm. We're just hearing from Karoline Leavitt again in the briefing room, Mona. She says about the prospect of Iran rejecting this peace proposal from the administration. They have not, she says. They have continued, referring to negotiations. They are productive, as the president said Monday, and they continue to be. She's in fact questioning reporting now about this 15-point plan, cautioning reporters from reporting about speculative points or speculative plans. How should we read into that answer?
Well, again, I think, the history of negotiations between the United States and Iran is one that is very much often deliberated in back channels and so forth. That being said, it is curious about the leaking of those 15 points. Did they just come out of thin air? Hard to believe that would be the case. I think what is clear is there is significant daylight right now between the United States and Iran, with the U.S. looking for maybe a 1-month ceasefire, Iran demanding a full cessation of hostilities, and Iran demanding, per its own press, that they retain sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. And I think that's going to be an enormous sticking point, not to mention the longstanding demands that the United States have had of Iran, whether it's its nuclear capabilities, its ballistic missile capabilities, or its support for proxies. And here, too, I think we can expect that Iran is going to push back on those demands. We've already seen indicators of that.